Séamus Dunne, welcome to the bar.
Gary Connolly, cheers.
Well, thank you for joining me. It's great to see a new face in the industry in Ireland. And
You know the way we talk about Irish people? We say the biggest compliment you can give is to say, you know what, he's good at his job, but I wouldn't have a pint with him.
well, there you go.
I like the answer. I'll have a pint with you, Gary.
We're having the best of both worlds, because if we actually just get bored with each other, we can switch off the computer and say it was a glitch. You're taking on the role this time last year of working with Interxion. That has been one serious year personally and professionally you've gone through, coming back from wherever you've come back from and ending up now country manager of a bigger organization than maybe you signed up for last year. So how are you feeling?
You know, it's one of the best work years of my career because it's all about managing something in Ireland. I've never actually done that before. When I graduated from college, I had a science degree, physics and maths and chemistry. I didn't even bother. There wasn't a job. So I ended up in London, then Germany, then France, came back here, then back in the States over an age, and always working and learning different companies' business. So I always wanted to be home, you know, for our generation. Like you and I are probably the same vintage. For our generation, there weren't a lot of jobs. I keep explaining that to my kids now as they're hitting college, and there just weren't options. The world is so different now. To actually have the option and the chance to do this is just unbelievable.
You would have come out of college around 83, would you? 83?
No. Well, a little bit later than that.
Out of school around.
Out of school, yeah. I left school the day Dublin had 3 lads sent off in the All-Ireland final against Galway.
So I have to believe that on the basis that you remember that particular thing, you like a bit of GAA, do you?
Both parents from Tralee, and always the train down to Kerry, and that's where I'd spend the summer. Probably half the things I learned from my dad's brothers, 8 boys in the family, and then my mother had 8 kids in the family, and they ran the shop. But my dad was orphaned at about 16, and the brothers were just fabulous bunch of men, you know. So learned a lot from them. But anyway, they weren't happy. I was a dub. No, but
period. They weren't happy.
Yeah. I played for St. Vincent's on the north side, which was a fairly famous club.
Yeah.
It is a famous club at that stage too. You know, the likes of Brian Mullins played for them, and Ray Hazley actually playing for them in that final when I left school.
Yeah.
But a ton of others. But I'd go down and I'd have the chats. One of my uncles played in an All-Ireland final against Roscommon in the 40s, you know, and he'd be giving me coaching tips, but he didn't like that I was bringing him back to Dublin, you know.
And would they not even take credit? Would they not even take credit for the bloodline? And that the only reason that you were successful wasn't because you were in Dublin playing for Dublin Miners or whoever, but it's because the bloodline goes back to Kerry. No.
They would deep down, but behind your back, not your face.
And when you travel,
that's what
obviously GAA, you know, when you traveled, you went to the UK and you went around. Did you maintain that link to the game?
I did, but you know, the GAA is very tribal, so your loyalty to your club is above all else. But actually, and a lot of people today wouldn't believe this, but I went to St. Joseph's Joey's in Marino or in Fairview, all boys, Christian Brothers. Soccer was banned. You know, Lee tells the story. He was in another club, and we were banned from playing soccer. So when I went, that's a fact. Yeah. Now, when we were 16, the ban was lifted, and we formed a soccer team, and we played it. We got to the Dublin final that year when we were like 16 years old. The team had a great colleague, Brian Mooney. He went off to play in Liverpool, and he's the best player that ever played for Preston North End in the end. But we played against Drimna Castle in the final over in their pitch. They were also, I think, just out of the ban and formed a team. And they beat us 1-0. I was the striker for our team and hit the post and missed everything. And the striker on the Drimna Castle team was Niall Quinn, who went on to be brilliant. Ireland, Arsenal, Italy 90.
Yeah.
So when I went to London, I joined a soccer team.
Okay.
You know, Premier League, and played for them, and that was brilliant. So that was the fun thing there. So they could. What happened actually, a lot of guys couldn't believe how fit I was, because the training we do at the GAA was just like, I managed a team, or I did with one of my son's team, And a mom would call up, their mother would call up and say, he won't make training tonight. And I'd be like, because I go back to the 80s, I'd be like, that's unacceptable.
Yeah,
It's not
yeah,
how it works now.
right.
Like,
But it's really interesting, and I would have said, except that you told me many times before about your sporting pedigree, that you were a team person. Because I think one of the things that I've always noticed in my career with people is that, you know, and now I'm sure you tell it to your team in Ireland, is that collaboration among a team is, you can't have strikers. We can't all be strikers. Some of us have to be right fulls. Some of us have to be on the bench. And I think fellas who play a bit of sport, we get that a bit. So it doesn't surprise me that you play sport, because I think that you nearly know within 3 minutes of meeting a fella or a girl whether they understand the whole concept of some fellas and girls have to be right fulls and some have to be on the bench every so often. And that's what makes a unit a unit. Do you find that still? Is it valid or is it less
it
valid?
definitely made a difference to me, you know, the GAA especially, you know, that's it's not just the team, it's the community sort of thing. But, you know, I'm careful about saying that in work because, you know, people can be great team players without being sporty, you know, and we all slip into a sports analogy or two, but I try to avoid it, to be honest, you know, because you really inclusive. It isn't everybody who's good at sport or participated in sport, you know.
Somebody told me once about, you know, that there's also some great benefits of people who are great at golf or snooker because they're so disciplined. And whereas...
Well, I think with the Tour de France on right now, you know, what people don't get is that's a team sport. You know, you do cycling as well, and it's really a team sport, you know. You sacrifice a lot to get the lead out there and stuff. And you know.
It's a bit like the industry that you work in and I work a bit on, is that it's until you get inside it, whether you cycle a bike or you play cricket or you play baseball, it all looks reasonably straightforward and easy until you get onto the pitch, you get on the bike or pick up the bat. One of the things I must say I'm refreshed by you coming into the ecosystem here in Ireland is you sort of think data and then center, whereas a lot of people might think center and then data. Are you finding that you're trying to educate and spending a lot of time moving away from the ping and the pipes and the power and talking about what business?
Yeah, I am really, Gary. You know, the world always changes and evolves, you know, and you got to keep learning and doing something different. Well, and I guess you always lead with your skills and your background. So I'm glad I've done a lot of changes and moving around in different industries and countries and so on. So when I love getting input from elsewhere. And one of the beautiful things about our industry is, you know, you can look to other countries to see what's about to happen next. You don't need a complete crystal ball, you know. It doesn't have to be some genius of innovate. So I spend a lot of time talking to people in the United States because I spent so long there, in both and in the East Coast and down in Texas. And you know, you can see what's happening in the trends there. And you know, when I was living in Texas in, say, you know, around 2009, 2010, co-location, you know, cloud was coming up. I was working for Hewlett Packard, and they were obsessed by looking at Dell in the server division. They really missed out on Cisco with their USC computing. And even then, that wasn't the real competition. It was the rise of AWS. And things change. And then co-location, we didn't focus on it that much at that stage because it was hosting and an alternative maybe in your economics to the cloud, which was really only beginning. And then the cloud became the growth engine for data centers. And they started growing themselves, and they started growing with providers like us. So there was a whole evolution. But when you look at it, well, what's going to happen next? What created the growth for the last 10 years is not necessarily what's going to create it for the next 10.
No, and you're so right.
World.
You're so right. And there was the old saying, and I guess it's still the same, the future's already here. It's just not that evenly distributed. And it's not just on gadgets. It used to, I think they were referring to the likes of Japan always had the gizmos, and it came over here. But looking at it from your filter, you know, and listening to you talk, even yesterday you were talking at an event here in Dublin, and what I thought you were very good at was know what problem you're trying to solve before you actually work out what tools you're going to actually offer. And it seems so basic And yet you were obviously saying it for a reason, because you feel it needs to be said and it needs to be understood. Is that, and I nearly go like this, and then I go, okay, we still have to say it because we've been saying this for a long time.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there, Gary. You know, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got early on in my career was from a guy called Dave Young. He was an executive in Hewlett Packard, came from a very fantastic place, Oregon. People there are very humble, I think, the Pacific Northwest. And his advice was have an opinion, first thing. And, you know, it's not intuitive to us Irish guys, particularly of our generation, you know, and I go Christian Brother School, yeah, and you don't want to be opinionated, right? So that's not what he meant. He said, have a viewpoint.
Yes.
Express it and make it an educated one, not just pick something out of there. So you got to have an opinion. But if you can have an opinion and be open to other people's ideas at the same time, then you're a good leader. You know, that was kind of the gist of his advice, which was fantastic. Yeah. So you have a viewpoint and an informed one, and you got to take the input of other people. So that's the first thing. The other thing I really struggle with is when people try to figure out the future by extrapolating the past. Well, then you're not changing anything. You actually have to go out there and change something. You know, so well, that might be true, but it's not the trend I see. Well, that's no good. Have an opinion and then go shape the future a little bit. You know, it's not like you have to completely change the world. I don't want to get into that sort of vision statements, but you know, they are two things. And I look at it, I see what's happening in the United States. So it's not like I've plucked something out of the air. I'm talking to people who know what they're doing and they're setting trends. It's like, get on board. Frankly, IT is all about evolution and change. You know, it's the way it's been for 30 years. So
it's funny, you know, you refer back to one of your early mentors in Oregon, and you just stimulated a thought with me of one of my early mentors in Dublin. I was the worst COBOL programmer that ever was put on this earth, but it was great because I knew what went on inside the head of a COBOL programmer. This guy, Peter Comerford, the first day I came into work, he handed me Animal Farm. And he obviously has me confused with someone in marketing.
Animal Farm, yeah.
Yeah, and he just said, look, we don't know the future, but we do know human habits. And usually things go back with different colors and stuff. And that was the whole thing about Animal Farm. And what he said to me, a bit like you about have an opinion, was meet the people, meet the people, meet the people. 9 words. And anytime he'd start a meeting, he used to say, how many people were met, because he said you could never, ever be wrong if you were testing all the time.
The other thing I'd add to that is cultures. And I would have, and there's all sorts of different cultures, company culture, big C and little c cultures. But like as Irish people, we're great networkers, we're great storytellers, we're great communicators, more than we realize ourselves or give ourselves credit for. And I've seen evidence over that for a long career. Now, the United States has a great innovation culture, great risk-taking culture. When I was first graduated, had my first job, I ended up living in Germany, a little town called Wuppertal. You really saw the brilliance of the organization and structure, particularly around engineering projects with the German culture, and got a huge amount out of it. But then I ended up working in the automotive industry in Michigan. And the first project I was on, I looked at it and I thought the scope of that project's too big. They can't do it on time. So then I started looking at the Gantt chart and I said to my boss, listen, there's a line in here and it says, and then a miracle occurs. Now, my training was in Germany. They didn't do, and then a miracle occurs. You had a plan, you know. But it was my first insight into the innovation and culture. It's like, we don't know, but we'll figure it out. And that was very much a US culture. Now that's maybe oversimplification. I don't want to generalize, but you know, we see everybody brings something different.
Isn't that what makes a beautiful tasting stew?
Well, here's the other thing. I was in Madrid with my uncle. His son-in-law is the assistant governor of the Central Bank of Spain at the time, and he loved his wine, and he'd be there showing us the wine and pairing us. And I said to him, you know, the best place to buy wine is Dublin. he just could not accept this, right? And but what I said to him was, if we go to a wine shop in Madrid, can I buy French and Italian wine or only Spanish? And he's smiling. You know, the fact is, in Ireland, from a work industrial culture, we take the best of everything.
Yes.
We've been hugely influenced by US management and big, but as they say in the IDA, digital in Galway was the greatest school of learning for, you know, the start of tech industry. And, you know, so we take the best and we learn from it. And we also have to, like, talents. Like my kids have no insecurity complex, and that generation don't, you know, because of this, you know, brilliant success.
But it's remarkable what you're saying, because even yesterday we were having some discussions around discipline, application. You know, what's the most important thing to have as a skill if AI is going to start to give us some answers, if AI is going to be starting to guide us? You still have to know, to your point earlier, have an opinion, whether it's telling you the right thing or the wrong thing. It's still the application. And those are the skills that we're trying to bring into the workplace. Is that what you saw before in the States that you're just starting to see now here? Or like, what have you seen different? You're effectively back in Ireland 12 months now. Is that reasonable? 12, 18 months?
No, I'm back a little longer. I'm in this job 12 months, which is very interesting. But, you know, I'm only back a few years from Texas, was the last place I was.
Yeah.
What I see in Ireland now compared with when I left, I mean, the world difference. You know, I tell you something, and I've heard this in the podcasts recently. I was living in Germany in 1990 when the Berlin Wall came down. I had a great friend, Ralph Oneiser, and we got into a bus to go to Berlin for a bit of celebration. We were in North Rhine-Westphalia. The bus broke down, which unusual event in Germany, and we celebrated. But when you think about after that event, Ireland took off. Now, taken off before, it's debatable, but you know, the world changed then, and Ireland got a chance in a way probably nobody thought they would, because they thought, you know, Poland and, you know, other Central and Eastern European countries would have done, and they've certainly benefited, but not in the same way as the flight of capital into Europe. And
so you're not buying into
the United States.
You're not buying into the thesis that it was Jack Charlton and the 1990 quarterfinal.
Well, those two things coincided.
It did.
And created an atmosphere. You know, I came back to Ireland because I found a job and came back to Ireland a few years after that.
Yeah.
You know, when you're away for a few years, now I'd come back often. When you're away for a few years and come back, and there was an atmosphere in the country, unbelievable.
Yeah.
And then, you know, things started to take off, and the economy started to turn around. I don't know, it was phenomenal. But what I see now, of course, it was very sad what happened with the financial crash and Lehman Brothers and then the whole collapse. And it's terrible to get a double whammy. So I do feel a lot of empathy for the younger generation, you know, folks in their 20s.
Yeah.
They've had big bolts. At the same time, when I put it into the bigger scheme of their lives, they're still in the spot.
Yeah.
And, you know, have people in Ireland that are very innovative, very creative. And for the first time, compared with the 80s and before, they're extremely confident.
Yeah, you know? and we've spoken
there's no insecurity, you know.
And we've spoken about it before as well, is that context is so important. Well, you know, context. Don't just look at something and say this is because of Ireland, because, you know, it's a scale thing as well. You got to look at it in the overall context. So Séamus, we could talk all day. I think you've got your cultural side of things and your ability to understand different cultures from your Kerry, Munster relatives. I'm sure when you write the book, it'll be all down to your early years. If there was 3 words, if you have 3 words, or maybe I'm putting you on the spot, that you would say encapsulates where you are, where Ireland is, where your business is, anything. We've had everything. I've asked people that, and one lad said, just keep swinging. Famous words from Rocky.
Well, I was actually going to say, go for it.
Go for it. You know, they're the...
like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Take a risk. And it's not even a risk. If you're capable of something, go for it. At a business level, at a life, just go for it. Another one I'd say, like, if I could have 2 versions of it, it'd be like, trust your gut. Your gut's nearly always right, you know.
Yeah, I don't trust my gut anymore because my wife tells me not. Listen, Séamus, it's been great. And thank you for coming into the data center ecosystem, I guess, in Ireland, because we need more people that understand data and the centers And we're going to have some follow-up webinar type things as well, where we're going to talk a bit more like that. But it was great to get to know you a bit more.
All right, Gary, good talking to you.